One of the hardest questions to answer with comics is a very basic one. Where do I begin? With so many years of continuity and an endless amount of series to choose from, finding a starting point can be difficult, but that's where this series comes in. Each week, I break down all the new comics coming out to check out ongoing series starting new arcs, notable new series, and trade and graphic novels being released. Then at the end, I pick out my pick of the week, the starting point I'm most excited about coming out this week. To start things off, let's look at ongoing series starting new arcs. The first ongoing series starting new arc we're going to talk about is Black Cat number 8. This begins the Infinity Score storyline where Black Cat is hired to steal the Infinity Gems. That sounds fun enough, but to add even more excitement to it, now the Infinity Gems aren't gems or stones, they're actually people. So how exactly she's going to pull this off, I'm not sure. This series has actually been really good. This is written by Jen McKay, who has actually been quietly one of Marvel's best writers over the last year or two. His Taskmaster series, which we'll actually talk about later, was fantastic, and he's really taking Black Cat in fun and new directions. And typically you think Black Cat, you think street level, anything above that should not work, but it actually has. Some of her tie-ins to King in Black, for example, were really good, and usually something like that would actually be kind of off place and not work. So when you see Black Cat holding the Infinity Gauntlet and you think that shouldn't work, that seems a bit silly, and sometimes silly works, especially with Marvel, especially when you have a magic love that grants wishes. I mean, come on, that's just generally silly. In the right context, it can work though, so that's why I'm somewhat excited with this. I've actually missed the last few issues, so I'm excited to kind of jump back in to see if this kind of had the magic it did when it first began. World's longest party has finally ended. Yes, the Hellfire Gala has finally concluded, and the X-Men have now gone on to new and exciting directions. We saw that with X-Men 1 a few weeks ago, and now the same is happening for Wolverine, or Logan, in issue number 14, as he's going on the hunt for Solemn. And Solemn's a character, as I've actually been someone out of the X-Men issues as of late, that I don't know a lot about. It's a newer X-Men villain, which I'm always excited for. I'm excited when X-Men tries to create new things rather than just try to relive the past over and over again. It's like, oh, we get to see them fight Apocalypse one more time, or oh, Magneto is going evil. Although sometimes that is also happening, but who knows. But this new character, Solemn, is one that, again, we don't know a lot of. This arc is seeing to kind of expand upon that character. So if you're somewhat interested in that character, you wanted to know more, or perhaps you kind of jumped off Wolverine, because I think this Wolverine book has been really good at times, and sometimes not that great. I love the one arc when they're in Madripoor. That was a lot of fun. Then you had Wolverine fighting vampires, and that wasn't nearly exciting, and the Hellfire Gala came, and those issues for Wolverine were kind of hit and miss. Nothing really happened. It's fun seeing Wolverine and Deadpool mix up, but overall nothing. But this is Wolverine on the hunt, which can be a lot of fun. You know, he is a natural hunter. I really like the Get Mystique storyline from probably a decade ago from now, and again, maybe that's something similar to that. So if you're a major Wolverine fan and you weren't maybe digging last arc like me, or you're enjoying the character after Hellfire Gala and want to be able to jump back on, this seems like it'd be a good issue to do that. Alright, let's move over to the world of DC, because they have a number of ongoing series starting new arcs this week, including one of their biggest books, Detective Comics number 1040, and this run so far has been, I think, pretty good. I kind of went into this with a large level of expectation, because I really like these creators. Maria Tamaki, I think, is one of today's best writers, especially in the right context, mostly her indie stuff. Her DC stuff, for some reason, hasn't been clicking with me, but I thought maybe Batman would, because I did like her stuff for Future State. And then Dan Mora as an artist is always fantastic, and that's been consistent throughout this. Even if the story hasn't fully clicked with me, it's always looked great, so there you go. This sees Bruce Wayne behind bars, and it seems like DC as of late really is trying to make Bruce Wayne work for it and Batman work for it. You know, he doesn't have his money anymore, and now he's going to be trying to survive in prison, and I kind of like that in a way, where this isn't, you know, Patch Malone's or whatever, you know, his alter ego or anything like that. This is Bruce Wayne trying to survive a situation in which Bruce Wayne, the billionaire, probably shouldn't. So there's nice little stakes there. This is an intriguing idea, so that can be kind of cool. And if you were like me and maybe the last arc wasn't clicking with you, and maybe you wanted to jump back in, because, you know, with Detective Comics, it feels like Detective Comics can be a little bit more open-ended with things, where I feel like the Batman book as of late, like everything has to be big and huge. I've been liking the fact that Detective at times has had smaller one-and-done stories, or at least storylines that haven't gone on forever. So I'm excited to jump back on board with this series, because sometimes it does take some time to kind of find your footing with a character, especially someone like Batman, who's been around for so long, has so many titles. Like, how exactly do you kind of etch your own corner of the Batman world? How do you kind of say what you want to say about Batman without repeating what has been said before? It's challenging, and it can kind of take some time. So hopefully, as they're getting more experience, especially with these creators working more and more together, this will get better and better, and we'll see with this arc. Also starting a new arc this week is the Other History of the DC Universe, number 5. And I say new arc, and maybe that's a bit of a cheat, because each issue of this series has been a one-and-done story, really focusing on one character and kind of going throughout their history from beginning to end, kind of looking at different aspects of continuity. It's very much its own thing, and typically incorporating other aspects of real-life history as well. That was especially the case for the first issue that focused on Black Lightning, and now in issue number 5, it's kind of circling back to focus on Black Lightning's daughter, Anissa, who is again looking at being this daughter of this iconic hero, but now she's Thunder and trying to go her own way in a world that's very different than that of her father's, but dealing with similar and different issues. This is written by John Ridley, who is actually beginning more and more work within the comic book world. He'd actually be taking over Black Panther in the next few months, and I think this is by far the best thing he's done in the world of comics. He came in writing screenplays, being an Academy Award nominated for 12 Years a Slave, which is of course a fantastic film, and I think that being more of a pro-stylist book has helped that a great deal, because writing a movie and writing a comic have some things in common, but they can be very different. It's a very different visual language, but there's a little bit more the same in translation. For example, when it comes to a book like this, it's easier to kind of write in this prose style with still imagery when you're not working about panel designs and things of that nature. And again, that's where the art plays a key role too, where that is telling a big part of the story, but doing so in specific images where you're not going to be able to rely on sequential art to tell a lot of the story. It strikes the really right balance, and this has actually been a really great series. It's one I would highly recommend. So far, you've been able to pick up each issue of this without reading anything prior and get everything you need. So you can kind of circle back to the first issue, which I think is still the best issue of the series thus far. Has me excited to see how it will continue that legacy in more ways than one. Similar to the Other History of the DC Universe number 5, we have Wonder Woman Black and Gold number 2, and I say that because this isn't necessarily a new arc of a continuing story, but rather an anthology series where each issue is bringing you new stories that are self-contained. And DC has a lot of these. Actually, comics have a lot of anthology series right now. I don't know necessarily why that is, but we're seeing them pop up, and personally I'm a fan of it. We have Batman Black and White, Superman Red and Blue, and now Wonder Woman Black and Gold. And usually my excitement will depend upon who exactly is going to be in that issue. One person we actually talked about already with Maria Otamaki will be part of this, but actually the person I'm most excited about taking on is Tilly Walden, who's one of today's best comic creators. She's written things like Spinning, which is a fantastic book. Most of her work has been more of the graphic novel indie scene, so she hasn't written a lot of DC stuff per se, but that has me excited, especially something like this, right, where she can step her toe into it. She's not trying to write a complete massive arc of a series or anything like that. Just a short story, get some experience with these characters, and I think DC comics are better when they kind of get some of these comic creators that are typically in other platforms, because maybe they can bring in new fans or give a different voice to characters that have especially been around for so long, as we're celebrating Wonder Woman's 80th anniversary. So if you're a Wonder Woman fan and you want to read some of her comics, this is a great one to go into. Or if you know someone who is a fan of her character and you're not really sure where to go, because Wonder Woman comics amongst many can be hit or miss, these are often your best bet, because you're going to get different flavors for each and every issue. So we'll see how this one works out this week. The last ongoing series starting a new arc this week we're going to discuss is Red Room number 3, written and drawn by Ed Piskor, who of course is known for doing things like Hip Hop Family Tree and X-Men Grand Design. This is very different than that. This kind of rides a line of being almost like torture porn in a way. It's about murder for profit on the dark web, and when they say murder, they definitely mean murder. And usually something like this wouldn't really work for me. It just would really gross me out, and I really wouldn't enjoy it. And I guess maybe because it's in black and white, or the cartoony is the way it is, I've never really turned off all that much, and I kind of am captivated by it. Each issue is self-contained, so even if you've not read the first two, you can probably jump into this and be fine. I will say, it will take you very quickly to find out if this is a book you're going to enjoy or not. There's going to be a lot of people that simply will be disgusted by this or won't like it for whatever reason, because it's not a book that's really going to try to like hide things in any way. It's, you know, it's very grotesque and kind of proud about that in a way that I find it charming. Oddly, it's, you know, that type of schlock that you used to get in, you know, maybe even like crazy Roger Corman films or even in comics back in the day, and really don't see that much anymore. I think this is certainly trying to bring that back. It's gearing towards a certain audience, and I'm usually not part of that audience, but it's working for me. Maybe because I'm a fan of Piss Core's work in the past, I'm kind of just trying to force it down. But so far so good. And like I said, it's not one that I'm going to, you know, read to my kids by any means, but I'm appreciating it thus far. So the next issue's out this week, and again, like I said, if you're at all intrigued, I would, you know, dive in, but be warned, because it may not be for the sleight of heart. Now that we talked about ongoing series starting new arcs, let's shift focus to a notable new #1 starting this week, starting with Superman, Son of Kal-El #1. And although this is a new series, this storyline is coming out of the current Superman line, Action Comics and Superman, and this is actually Tom Taylor taking over the title. And Tom Taylor has been one of the most consistent writers over the last few years, and he may be having one of his best years yet, especially when you look at Nightwing, which is, I think, unquestionably DC's best book right now. Best looking book, best story. It's just a delight. To me, it captures everything you want in a DC book, and if he takes that same flavor and ingests it into the Superman title, I think it can work. And Jonathan Kent, I think, is a character that has a lot of potential, and it was starting off really strong when he first came on the scene, but really during Bendis' run, I felt like they just didn't necessarily know what to do with the character. He was on the forefront of the Future State comics earlier this year, where he was Superman, and those books were okay for the most part, nothing really special. I still don't think they really made him this exciting character, like, oh, this definitely could be the Superman for a new age. Hopefully this is the book that does, except you think Jonathan Kent at his heart is a great character, being the son of Superman, but being able to forge his own legacy. I know he was aged up, and there was a lot of controversy over, was that a good idea or a bad idea? It's an idea that happened, so what can you do with it now? And hopefully this does something with it, because at this point, I think Philip Kennedy Johnson has done as much as he could thus far, and hopefully getting a book that is completely centered on him, we'll even see that develop further. Milestone Comics continues to return with Icon and Rocket #1, and for those that don't know, Milestone was a line that was during the 90s that was really critically acclaimed, started by Dwayne McDuffie, among many other comic book creators, that really focused on African American characters that were really underrepresented within comics as a whole. Milestone unfortunately went away for some time, but now it's back, and we've had Milestone Zero #1, Static #1, which I really liked. I thought it was a really solid first issue, and if this is anything like Static #1, I will say it does seem like Milestone Zero is an important issue for you to read, so you may want to check that out first, because it does seem like that's laying the groundwork for this new Milestone universe. So just to be warned about that. Not that you won't be able to necessarily catch up per se. I think Static at least did a good job of explaining what happened, but it does seem like Milestone Zero wasn't just, you know, a cash grab or anything like that. It's really setting the foundation for this universe. So if you're huge fans of these characters, I know there are a lot out there, and they're also been re-releasing a lot of the classic line as well. So if you really like this and maybe want to check out the old stuff, a lot of it's available on the DC app or Comixology, and you may be able to kind of see the entire legacy of these important comic book characters that are finally coming back to the shelves. DC is also seeing another return with Secret Files. Secret Files used to be a series and line that was around a lot, and we're seeing this with Batman Secret Files Huntress #1, and this is written by Maria Tamaki, who has been doing a lot. We already talked about her earlier in this episode regarding her run on Detective Comics, and now this is an issue focused completely on Huntress, which is a character I know a lot of people are huge fans of. She's been in a lot of Batman teams, you know, things like Birds of Prey. She's had her own books, and unfortunately, right now she hasn't had her own book in I don't know how long. It's been quite a while. She showed up here and there in some of the Batman books, but she really hasn't been a major focus. So if she is one of your favorite characters, if you really do like that character, know you'll have this issue. And even if you're not familiar with the character, most of the secret files are pretty welcoming to new readers. They're kind of designed to kind of focus in on a character, do some side stories, things like that, things that can touch upon some of the main goings on in some of the other books, but aren't necessarily essential reading. But just because it's essential doesn't mean it won't necessarily be good. Again, I've generally been enjoying what Ryo Tamaki's been doing with the Batman world, and exciting to see what you can do with a character like Huntress. Marvel's not the only company bringing back old titles and old series, as Amazing Fantasy #1 is debuting this week, and of course Amazing Fantasy 15 being the most iconic, one of the most iconic issues of all time, bringing us Spider-Man, and now it's starting again. Amazing Fantasy 15 or Amazing Fantasy, when it was a series, wasn't always superhero focused. This does seem to be, and this is a creative team I don't know a lot about, but I am excited based upon the concept of this. And it's the idea where they're taking different versions of characters you know, like young Spider-Man or Black Widow when she was in the Red Room, and Captain America from World War II, and they all find themselves on this mysterious fantasy island, and how they got there, why they're there, and they're not sure, but they kind of have to figure things out. And I'm a fan of those types of stories, like one of my all-time favorite comics, Exiles, which is this idea of like different people, different characters from different dimensions being forced on a team and having to like stop world calamity events. And this could be something like that, almost like a Lost-like feel, but with Marvel heroes. That can be kind of cool. And I'm not someone that tries to judge a book based upon its cover, but the cover for this does look fantastic. It has a very pulpy feel, like a classic serial, and if it can lean into that, that could be kind of cool. I could see this really being a sleeper hit or an unexpected gem, and one that can be easily overlooked because, again, Amazing Fantasy 15 is something that people all know about, but it's not necessarily a series that people glom onto or just think, oh, it's a Spider-Man book. This seems to be a little bit more than that. It doesn't seem to be tied to anything else within the Marvel Universe, so even if you're not a Marvel fan and you haven't been keeping up with Marvel, this should be welcoming to new readers. We do have some new #1 art from Marvel and DC, this time looking at the last book you'll ever read, #1, and Vault is one of the most consistent publishers out there. Although what we're seeing now too is that they're publishing and working a lot more with more established talent. You know, usually they had kind of young and up-and-coming writers or writers that haven't been fully established working with Marvel and DC, which I've liked, but now we're seeing them kind of do a combination of both, which I can kind of understand. If Chris Cantwell in this book is written by Cullen Bunn, who at this moment in time I think is writing about 40% of all comics, because he's got so many things out there, and pretty much with all publishers, so exciting to see that. He's very consistent despite the output, especially when it comes to a horror book and horror styles, and I wonder if this will follow in that. It's about this woman who writes this book that has devastating effects. It's talking about how the world basically is not real and kind of living in a facade, and that has caused a lot of people to go out and cause violence, and she is destined to go on a book tour to kind of sell her book, so she gets a bodyguard, and this is kind of focusing on her journey throughout that. So there's a lot of interesting things here. Again, a story about a story, which can be kind of cool, and Cullen Bunn has done some stuff like that before. So if you're a Cullen Bunn fan, or you're a horror fan, or you're a Vault fan, and you're looking for a new series to get into, this may be one you want to choose this upcoming Wednesday. Now that we talked about notable new #1s, let's shift focus to look at trades and graphic novels coming out this week. The first trade paperback I want to talk about is actually one of my favorite early series of the year from Marvel, and it's part of the King in Black line. And I know when it comes to events like King in Black and you see side stories or the spin-offs or things like that, people tend to dismiss them, and I get that, but King in Black Thunderbolts to me was the best thing about that line and about King in Black in general, which is an event I liked, but to me this was just two of Marvel's best comic book creators showing what they can do. And this is written by Matthew Rosenberg with art by Juan Ferreira, who are two of my favorite kind of comic book creators right now. I love Matthew Rosenberg's writing style. Four Kids Walking the Bank, his Hawkeye Freefall last year, a lot of fun. And Juan Ferreira is a must-buy artist for me as well. When you get his working and you get a lot of great and inventive page layout, a lot of style, really unlike anything that's out there right now. I just really love the look he gives, and you see his pure storytelling with this book as well. And Thunderbolts can be a premise that works or not works. Some people say it's just Marvel's version of Suicide Squad. although it wasn't that when it first came out. It's kind of evolved into that. But this is, again, showing why that can work. This sees Kingpin getting a bunch of villains together, including Taskmaster, who we'll talk about later, Rhino, and as well as Star, and they try to find a way to stop Null, which is kind of weird, and what they end up doing is kind of grotesque and fun in the right ways, and it's just showing kind of this ragtag group of basically people that aren't heroes, kind of doing heroic things, but not really. I mean, even Backtrack the Leaper has some amazing moments in this, so a book I would highly recommend. Even if you were not into King of Black and can care less about Venom, this is a book you're going to want to read. Does it impact the overall plot of King of Black? I know a lot of people are like, the tie-ins must have some major impact. They have to matter. To me, you matter by telling a good story, and that's exactly what this series did. So I mentioned Taskmaster, and Taskmaster is also coming out this week, his own series that just recently wrapped up, and there's been a lot of conversation regarding the character of Taskmaster because of Black Widow, and I kind of wish some of that conversation was pointing to the fact that this series was a whole lot of fun. It was a huge surprise hit. I mentioned with Jen McKay and Black Cat how he's been one of Marvel's best writers secretly over the last 2 years or so, and this series is part of that. It was this idea of Taskmaster being framed or potentially framed for the death of Phil Coulson, and he goes on the run and he's being hunted by Black Widow. Now, corporate synergy at its best, but it was still really good. It showcased like why Taskmaster can be a great character, but also why Black Widow can be a great character. Introduced some new characters. It was funny. It was insightful. It had a lot going for it. The art was really solid as well. Go up against characters like Hyperion, and you showed why like his skill is more than just being able to replicate fighting styles. There's more to it than just that. So if you are, I hear so much about how many Taskmaster fans exist now. So if you are one of those people, definitely check this out, because I think hopefully this will be the character that you've been wanting all this time and been talking so much about. You'll find it with this series. The next trade paperback we're going to talk about is a much read for any Marvel fan, because it's the entire history of the Marvel Universe, written by Mark Waid and art by Javier Rodriguez, who is another must-buy artist for me as well. One of the most eventful artists in comics. The way he constructs his panel designs within the art, there's so many incredible things he does with this series. It was really underrated because I think people, didn't know what to make of it exactly. Like, what are you doing in the history of the Marvel Universe? Is it like those old tech books you would get that would kind of show you a character and their special powers and things like that? There was no story there. That's not really the case. There is a story here, at the same time kind of trying to take everything within Marvel and fit it into a few issues of a comic, and it somehow succeeded at doing just that, and just reshape a lot of things within the Marvel Universe, as well as you have the shifting timeline. And for example, the Punisher being a Vietnam vet doesn't really make sense anymore, so this tries to correct that in the only way it can. But outside of that, it's just, I think, well told, interesting look at the Marvel Universe, and combining both real life and fantasy life as well. But generally, even if the story wasn't there, the art is just a feast for the eyes, so you'd want to check it out just for that reason. Sometimes there's those series that I wish I didn't give up on because I'm hearing so much great things about them, and that's the case for Rain Like Hammers, and that's trade paperbacks coming out this week. It was a book that I liked, but I was just having difficulty getting into it. But then after I stopped reading it, I've been hearing so many great things about it, and now I'm excited because the trade's coming out. And it's a bit hard to describe this book. It's this look at this weird-looking future where you have kind of almost like a dystopia with like cities within these vehicles, and I'm really not doing it justice unless you read it. And that was kind of partially why I had challenged with the first issues, because I was finding difficulty to connect with it. But I think reading it as a complete piece may change that. I know Sleep Reader, for example, had really high praise to say, and he's a person that I trust when it comes to an opinion, so I want to go back and check it out. So if you're looking for another hidden gem within comics, this may be one you want to look out for this upcoming Wednesday. As I'm doing this video, pretty soon the new Snake Eyes movie will be debuting, and is it good or is it bad? Who knows? G.I. Joe has not had the best luck when it comes to cinema. And also coming out this upcoming Wednesday, the trade paperback of Snake Eyes, which was written and drawn by Rob Liefeld. And I know Rob Liefeld is one of those figures in comics who is polarizing, I don't even know if polarizing works because there's clearly his fans, there's his detractors, and there's everyone in between. But if you are a Rob Liefeld fan, and I know there many are, and you wanted to know what he's been doing, you have Snake Eyes, which has been a book that has been heavily delayed. I do know the last issue had this gimmick where each page was inked by a different inker. It's kind of cool just to see how much an inker can impact what we want to look at historically. That I talked about earlier with Red Room, Jim Rugg, even Neil Adams, like a cavalcade of talent to help him do this final issue, which is kind of weird and kind of weird thing to do, especially for the last issue of a comic. But if anything, it does fit Rob Liefeld's MO. So if you are a Snake Eyes fan or you're looking for something to check out, I'm kind of just curious to read it because it's almost like that train wreck type of feel, just to see how much of a mess it can possibly be. I don't know. I'm hesitant, to obviously purchase a book like that because you don't want to waste money on something you're not going to enjoy. But maybe it's at the library or something like that. I might give it a peek just to see how exactly this thing turned out. The next graphic novel I'm going to talk about is Together by Luke Adam Hawker, and this is a philosophical and gentle look at the events of 2020 and how we as society and individuals can take on the unexpected. And I don't know much about this comic book creator, but as I was looking through the titles, that kind of caught my eye because I do think it does seem like something that we as individuals could really do, is kind of just take a moment and take a deep breath to look at the insane year that was 2020. It's almost insane that we're already halfway through 2021 already, but it could be an interesting look at that and just seeing what happens and how exactly can we get through something like that. I think sometimes we're so go, we don't stop to reflect, and what a better way to reflect than a graphic novel. So it may end up being just a bunch of hullabaloo or whatever you want to call it and not being an effective book. I don't know, but at least it's interesting the effort and the idea behind this, so that's why I wanted to check it out. We talked about notable new number ones. We talk about ongoing series starting new arcs and trades and graphic novels being released. Now let's get to it. My pick of the week. The starting point I'm most excited about coming out this week. So if I'm being honest, I'm just excited to getting back to doing this video again. It's been a crazy last few, really month, so I apologize for the delay. But if you check out my haul video, I can kind of get into what exactly happened, but hopefully moving forward, I should be able to get back to doing this weekly. But when I did look at the books this week, and I gotta say, I didn't really pick the best week to come back. There's some exciting stuff I talked about, but there wasn't that book that was like, oh my goodness, or a huge slate of a lot of new exciting starting points this week. It just sometimes happens. It does seem to happen a lot, especially with the last week, especially with something like July. I don't know, because you're kind of getting into that dog days of summer. I don't know, but this pick of the week, I will say, was actually really happy to find. By kind of digging deeper, I found a book I may have otherwise missed, and I'm super excited to read this because it combines some things I really enjoy. The comic is Did You Hear What Eddie Gein Done? And this is about one of America's most notorious serial killers, and I'm not one of those people that love those kind of true crime-esque porn documentaries that you're seeing a lot, especially on Netflix right now. But I do like myself a great crime story and a well-researched crime story. And knowing this is a type of serial killer that inspired things like Psycho and Silence of the Lambs, that does have me excited. I really know nothing about the individual that this book is based on. But really the big reason I'm really excited for this is because it's done by art by Eric Powell, who is a fantastic artist. I recently, over the last few years, just got into the book Goon, which is his creation, and that really allowed me to appreciate his art. And his art does have a very gothic look to it, so when you combine that with a story like this that is designed to be a nonfiction story, from what I can tell, this isn't necessarily a narrative base. It's more looking at this individual and who he was. It's supposed to be really well researched as well. So when you combine all that, I love myself a good docu-comic and a good documentary in general, and when you add in an artist I greatly admire, all that to me seems like it'd be something unique, different, and an exciting read, and a book I'm really not seeing many people talk about. So that's why I'm definitely super excited for this book. So if you're looking for something like that, if anything like that kind of floats your boat like it does me, you may want to check it out this week. But anyways, thanks again. I know there are a lot of different comic book channels out there, and I appreciate anyone that's sticking with me despite the fact it's been a while since I put a video out like this. But hopefully, like I said, moving forward, that everything should be back to normal. And I know there's a ton of comic book channels out there, so I appreciate any of you, anything like that. Do know that I truly do appreciate all that. So thanks for taking the time, and just remember, comics are for everyone. The key is finding the right one. Until next time, keep reading.